Welcome to the module on culinary medicine. Let's go over the outline for this module, which is one of the longest ones of this whole course. I'd like to share with you about what we're going to cover today. I'm going to discuss the basic overall principles that you can apply for everyone in culinary medicine for your practice. We'll go over some food preparation strategies, specific foods for mental health, and combining foods for their optimal effects. Some accessibility and money-saving tips, how to use your kitchen as your pharmacy, the spectrum of foods, and specifically some that are antidepressant and anxiolytic and anti-inflammatory in action, how to use fermented foods and their value, and including some unusual recipes and foods that you may not have heard about. How to use fats and plants together, and how to use foods to address issues like hypoglycemia, which affects moods. We'll go over comfort foods and cravings, along with what I call the principle of substitutions. We'll talk about diets and a variety of diets and also their relationship to genetics and bio-individuality. We'll talk about traditional ancestral foods, and I'll share with you some photographs from my journeys around the world and working with indigenous peoples preparing foods. Food allergies and sensitivities, which we know are highly related to mood and mental health disorders. I'm going to share lots of recipes and exercises with you. And remember that not only do we benefit from different foods and knowing about diets, but also just knowing about different cultures and different cultural foods is going to enhance our cultural competency and our ability to build rapport, along with having novel foods in our own diet from time to time. So put your feet up, grab a cup of green tea and some raw almonds, and we're going to begin. Nutrition matters, and it's the most important missing link in mental health. I'll probably repeat this adage throughout our whole course. I love this quote from Dr. Alan Gaby, a MD who's also a nutritionist, from Big Mac to Zantac to Prozac. This suggests what we know from the SAD diet. If we eat junk food, it's going to give us indigestion and then lead to depression and the taking of Prozac or other SSRIs. Culinary medicine is the integration of nutrition and culinary knowledge to support clients in achieving and maintaining optimal physical and mental health. What does it include? Culinary medicine for mental health is the art of food and cooking for health. It's the science of food as medicine for mental and physical health. In culinary medicine, we target specific foods and the preparations for specific health conditions. We educate and support our clients to make informed and better decisions about their personal dietary habits, and we begin with them at the stage where they are. We want to be isomorphic to their belief system, and that ensures better efficacy. We want to educate our clients about how to access good food and to refine or develop their preparation skills. Just helping clients get into the kitchen, buying good foods is often a first step for many people. And then, of course, bringing awareness about the effects of food on health and well-being. And that's decreasing not only personal dissociation, but the social dissociation that people experience about food and well-being. Diets for individual needs and life stages. What we need at different life stages varies. So for example, we're going to focus on biochemical individuality, what we need genetically, how our genetics and our cultural heritage determines the fuel that will best fuel our engine, our brain, mind, and body. There'll be some discussion of genetics-based diets, particularly related to the APOE code, which is a risk factor for the development of Alzheimer's and heart disease. We'll talk about gluten-free diets, anti-inflammatory diets, the ketogenic diet, liquid diets, and diets for recovery, and much more. The key is understanding what we need as infants, what we need in school, what we need as adolescents, during adulthood, middle age, and then in our elder years. These all change according to age, but also according to stress levels and environmental exposures. What are the 10 diet essentials I'd like you to keep in mind? There's no one right diet for everyone. If you improve digestion, you improve your mental health. Eat only when relaxed. Mood follows food, so eat breakfast and make sure it's good protein and not refined cereals. Eliminate all refined carbohydrates. That is a non-starter. You've got to eliminate some of the foods that are poisonous for the brain and mind. Eliminate exposures to these additives that we find in packaged foods, the preservatives, the red dyes. While some people can survive and prosper okay mentally and physically with some exposure, there are many people who are extremely sensitive due to their particular biochemical individuality. So eliminating these exposures is central to developing good mental health. Nourish the first brain and the second brain, and we'll cover how to do that today. Eat all of the colors of the rainbow, and choose healthy foods and nutrients over too much alcohol or drugs to alter consciousness. Again, our theme that we'll explore is the role of foods in altering consciousness as a way to help people who are self-medicating with foods or different substances. Food is medicine. Eat foods that contain the medicines you need to stay healthy, and use these foods to address specific health needs. Every little change that we make in our diet helps, but it really takes the totality of change to make a big difference. Food medicines are gentle and therefore have limited or almost no side effects. And that's why, for example, eliminating bad fats is essential. Adding in good fats is very helpful and essential. But in and of itself, it won't be part, it has to be part of a much bigger picture of making comprehensive change. And as we're working with ourselves and our clients or patients, think about this as an ongoing, lifelong process of change. And that way it doesn't seem quite so overwhelming when making these changes. What are the medicines in foods? In general, vitamins, minerals, and fats, they're nutrients, but they also have different actions upon our brain and our mind and our body. They have antioxidants. Foods have anti-inflammatory polyphenols. They have volatile oils, oils that really enhance our sense of smell and alter our awareness. For example, we know through research that the smell of citrus uplifts our mood. So opening up an orange and inhaling it, or having some lime and smelling it before you have a limeade, is a very slight mood booster. Foods also balance blood glucose because they're rich in fibers. Think about fibers as our broom for the colon, sweeps out the waste, but also they slow the uptake of sugar. And you'll hear me over and over again talk about the importance of blood glucose balance for maintaining stable mood. Foods detoxify. They're very rich in sulfurs, which enhance the methylation process, which helps our liver detoxify waste, but also is essential for a healthy mood and as an antidepressant. For example, onions and garlic are among the most well-known sulfur-rich foods. And then ultimately, foods alter our consciousness. Think about the making of beer or fermented foods, coffee, tea. We eat so many foods, carbohydrates, that alter our mood and alter our consciousness. In all these ways, foods are medicine. One of the most important diet essentials we'll review is to prepare fresh food daily. Gather, prepare, and share fresh food. Preparing fresh food is an act of self-nourishment, emotionally as well as physically. Gathering food, preparing it, and sharing it is a ritual. It leads to relaxation, and in a relaxed state, we're ready to eat, enjoy, and digest, and commune with others. This in itself is an act of attachment and connection that boosts mood and alleviates mental distress. This is a lost ritual of modern society. The rituals of food preparation are rhythmic, they're repetitive, and they integrate both the right and the left brain. I love to prepare food in a group, and I love to show my children how to prepare food and enjoy the act itself of cutting, of washing, of bumping into each other in the kitchen, and having a good time. Ritual and the ritual of food preparation aligns our nervous system. It synchronizes our nervous systems with those of others. It's an attunement process, and it's where our social connections begin. What are the basics of food preparation, and what do we need? And when I'm working with someone who may not be familiar with food prep, I try to keep it simple and suggest one or two implements or tools at a time. Here you see a delicious stew that was made in a crock pot. I find a crock pot the simplest way to cook for most people. It's easy for our busy lives. How about a steamer? Because we know steaming many vegetables is the way to go. And I like not only the metal or silicone steamers you can plug into a pot, but there are these wonderful Chinese bamboo steamers that are multi-layered that you can get at an Asian food store that are inexpensive and a lot of fun to work with. I make a wonderful egg custard, a savory egg custard that I'll give you a recipe for that's not only fun but delicious, like you'd get at any high-end Japanese or Asian restaurant. A blender is essential for our smoothies. 1 or 2 knives, one for paring and one for chopping. A large and a small pan for sauté. A thermos is essential, for example, making bone broth or vegetable broth, and you can take it off to work with you and have a delicious, nourishing lunch midday that stays hot. A hot pot is very big these days. A cooler for the car. We work with so many people, and ourselves included, who travel throughout the day or may want to prepare food at home and then bring it with us and keep it cool. Maybe we're on the road to see clients, make home visits, or maybe we want to just travel between home and office. So I recommend keeping a cooler in the trunk of the car, and then you can keep ice packs in the freezer and just change those out every day. I also keep quart jars, and I fill them with water every day. And I place them all around the house, all around the office, and that way I know by the end of the day I've had my water intake. Now I know that microwaves are a very big part of our modern kitchens, but I want to suggest that we avoid using the microwave. Don't turn it on. You can still use it. I use the microwave as a lazy Susan for all of my herbs and spices. It's perfect for that. But to reheat food or prepare food, I would avoid it. Dr. Becker, who was a very esteemed researcher in electromagnetics and actually pioneered the use of electromagnetic pulses for the healing of broken bones at the University at Syracuse, did research on the effects of microwaves, suggesting that microwaves alter our GABA receptors, alter the benzodiazepine receptors in the brain, increasing anxiety. Now, this work was on the animal model, but I would not recommend using microwaves. Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, the esteemed immunologist, suggested that it changed the molecular structure of foods. Now, I have searched high and low for a lot more literature, and more may come out as we do more research on it. But I would, again, defer to Mother Nature. I want to eat and prepare foods as Mother Nature gave us. And I include the discovery of fire in Mother Nature's methods. So what are some additional preparation strategies? Let's prepare for good taste. We can't make these changes in our diet unless we feel satisfied and our taste buds are happy. So how we prepare certain foods will depend upon taste, but also what will enhance the bioavailability of their nutrients. Think about boiling, broiling, steaming, baking, slow cooking, or an occasional quick fry and saute. One of the things I'll ask you to keep in mind is the danger of heating oil at too high a temperature. And it breaks down and can cause oxidation in the body, which can cause inflammation and a whole host of maladies that we've explored a little bit. So that's the rationale behind how we prepare certain foods. Dark leafy greens are best eaten lightly steamed or cooked to enhance their nutritional value. I love a dark leafy green salad as well. But keep in mind that you want to at least have a balance with your raw dark leafy greens and your cooked leafy greens. Cook your cruciferous vegetables. Yes, have some broccoli florets or some cauliflower or even some raw Brussels sprouts in your salad. But again, the cruciferous vegetables are best eaten lightly steamed and make sure you add your good fats to those, because those will help you absorb their vitamins, the A, D, in the broccoli and the cruciferous vegetables. And I've given you a list here of all of a range of cruciferous vegetables. Now be careful. Too much cruciferous raw can interfere with thyroid function, which we know can be depressed and therefore contribute to depression. So just monitor and don't go overboard with your raw cruciferous. Now, as I mentioned, specific oils have what's called a smoke point. And some of that refers to the temperature at which an oil starts to burn and smoke, and thereby degrades the quality of the oil and will decrease the value of that oil for you. So here is a chart of smoking points of different cooking fats and oils. On the left-hand side, you'll see avocado oil. That has a high smoke point, so it's a good oil to saute, to make your curries, or to saute your vegetables and shrimp, or your vegetables and meat, for example. Butter has a much lower smoke point, and if you've made eggs in butter, you'll see, you may have noticed that butter will turn brown. It means it started to burn. And so butter is not a great fat to cook with. Coconut oil has a moderate smoke point, but a refined coconut oil, which you might use for cooking, goes a little higher. We see this a lot in Asian cooking and Southeast Asian food dishes. Flaxseed oil is not meant to be cooked in. I think flaxseed would be a good cold oil to add to your smoothies. Ghee has a high smoke point, so if you want to cook with a butter type product, ghee would be your option. Lard has a moderate smoke point, and always get fresh leaf lard. Don't buy any commercial lard if you're going to use it. Lard, by the way, is a good anti-inflammatory in small amounts. Olive oil is really one of our ideal oils. It has a moderate smoke point. It's not ideal. With occasional use, if you don't feel like coconut oil, you can use some olive oil for cooking, but cook at a low temperature. Peanut oil is a good oil to cook in if you can get a cold-pressed peanut oil. Occasionally, I'll discuss a little bit later how peanuts have aflatoxins. It's a fungus found to be carcinogenic. So peanut oil is a treat. And then, of course, sesame oil. You can cook with unrefined sesame oil and, of course, some toasted sesame oil. But again, I wouldn't raise it to a high fry temperature. So think of food prep as meditation. Go into food preparation with a mindfulness state of mind. I like to prepare food, a little bit of my food every day, but I like to prepare some of the bigger items once or twice a week. For example, for a busy schedule, I will boil up a dozen eggs or even 24 eggs, depending upon my household for that week, and keep them as hard-boiled eggs, and I can grab them, throw them into the cooler if I'm off on the road, or I can grab them for a snack. I can send them with the kids to school as a mid-morning snack to sustain energy. Roast your dozen sweet potatoes and keep them in the fridge, and you can heat them up, you can make them into a mousse, you could even add it to a smoothie. Make your fresh salad dressings, and later on I'm going to give you my recipe for brain bolt salad dressing. Make your salad dressings, make a few different kinds so you don't get tired of them. Put them in jars, keep them in the fridge, and grab them and throw them into your cooler when you're going to head out for the day. I like to bake 1 or 2 chickens. I like to cover them with some olive oil and then sprinkle some different herbs on one and choose some different herbs for another and bake them. And then I can keep them in the fridge. I can divide the parts, put them in Tupperware, and then grab a Tupperware for the day that I'm going to head out. I like to make teas in advance. Jamaica is a wonderful tea that I want to introduce you to. A chamomile tea we've discussed. Any kind of tea that you like, make it cold and in advance. The key to mental health nutrition is being prepared and not being caught off guard when our energy drops, when we get hungry, when we haven't got something ready, and then we grab something that isn't always the best for us. Soak your dried fruit and your nuts overnight in Tupperware. I love to take almonds, some sunflower seeds, both raw, add some apricots, some prunes and raisins, cover them with water, and then I've got a great snack. I can pour off the liquid, use it over my oatmeal, add it as a natural sweetener to my smoothie, and then I can just take the Tupperware with me on the road and have a delicious snack ready at hand. And then, of course, bone broths. When you're preparing all your vegetables, we often have parts that we don't use. Bone broths and vegetable broths can be prepared in advance. So, for example, if I cut off the end of carrots or the greens that come with fresh carrots, if I have the onion peels or even the garlic covering, if I've got anything from celery or the ends, roots of any vegetable that I'm going to use, like lettuce, the peels that I take off broccoli that I'm going to steam, all of this I save throughout the week and I put it in Tupperware. So I keep my bones separately, raw bones, and I keep my vegetables separately in the Tupperware, and then once a week I take the bones, the raw bones, or cooked bones, and I will put it in a crock pot, and then I will take my vegetables and either put them in a crock pot or in a pot and gently simmer on low for about 8 hours. And this will give us nourishing, mineral-rich broths that then can be stored in the freezer. You can label them, and as you're going to make a soup, or as you're going to just heat it up to take a broth to work, you've got these foods available. And let me emphasize the role of bone broths and mineral broths with very easily assimilated minerals. And bone broths in particular are very high in glycine, very good for recovery from drug abuse and alcohol abuse, also used in the psychotic disorders. Anytime you're in a recovery mode where digestion isn't working well, your broths that are mineral rich, that have a little bit of fat in them, are going to be very soothing and nourishing and supportive for recovery. We're all going to be concerned with access and affordability. So think about meal planning. Plan your meals by writing up a grocery list or use some of the great apps that are out there on the market. And plan for a week at a time. Pick a day of the week to organize your food and food prep and get all the members of your household in on this. Wash and prepare your vegetables for the week. Obviously, organic vegetables are the best, but if you cannot afford organic vegetables or afford all of them as organic, then you can come home and you can soak them for a few minutes in a big bowl of water by adding a little bit of soap or a little bit of Clorox to that water. Let them soak, rinse them, dry them off, and then store them in the fridge. They'll also last longer. Travel with your cooler bags and your thermoses and access your food from community-supported agriculture. Join a CSA, and if you live near farms, volunteer. You can often get big discounts on food gathering. Make it a family and a friend event. And of course, a home garden. At the very least, have a home herbal garden, both inside and out. What are some other money saving and shopping and food buying tips? Volunteer at a co-op or at a farm. Get reduced prices. Look at the day-old bins and get your veggies for making good soups. I'll often go to the fish market and get the fish heads and the bones, which they often will want to throw away. But these have some of the best nutrients. And so gather those and make friends with your local fishmonger or your local butcher to get some of the cheapest cuts of bones and meats and fish that will actually be among the most nourishing. When you're shopping, healthy food's often at the perimeter of the supermarket, so just walk the perimeter and get some exercise while you do that. Buy in bulk, and sometimes buying online for delivery can be effective for seeds and nuts. Making sure that they're fresh, because they're so rich in healthy oils, you want to make sure that they're not rancid. That's why seeds and nuts should be kept in jars in the fridge. Shop at what we call ethnic food stores, or local food stores for inexpensive herbs, fresh roots. Often they're supplied by farmers and the family and friends. Look at your Mexican, your Asian, your Indian food stores for all your wonderful foods that we'll explore further in this module. Buy frozen foods like berries to save money, or shop at the farmer's market in the summer. Prepare your fresh berries from the summer and freeze them. That might mean getting a good-sized freezer. And shop so that half of your plate will end up with fruits and vegetables. Leafy greens like kale, chard, collard, spinach, and broccoli are among the most nutritious and the least expensive. But keep in mind, these foods also retain the highest level of fertilizers, and so you want to avoid buying these unless they're organic. This is where you want to be very diligent. Spinach retains high levels of inorganic fertilizers, so be careful with these dark leafy greens. And we know that fresh fish is a challenge for us these days in terms of the health of the ocean. Avoid your farmed fish. What is better would be to buy your canned wild fish that is often packaged in Alaska and from other areas of the world. Avoid your smoked fishes, like your smoked oysters, however. They're often stored with cottonseed oil, and the smoking process is not that good. But certainly buying smoked salmon as a treat can be very healthy for you. And anchovies. When I talk a little bit later about people who are fast metabolizers, who benefit from increasing purines, anchovies are very high in purines, and they slow down a fast metabolism. So for all you lovers of the Caesar salad out there, know that about anchovies. It's a very good food. Let's talk a little bit about the basics of mental health nutrition. Let's begin with choosing some initial goals for change for ourselves and our clients. Think back to the results of the food mood diary that you conducted with your client. Coming out of that diary and discussion process, as you recall with Alma, we developed some goals for steps. And the key to success is step by step, one goal at a time, getting successful and then being ready to identify the next goal. One of our goals should be to manage our blood glucose levels. And this is where I say again and again, if we balance our blood glucose, we balance our mood. Remember to eat or snack. Many people benefit throughout the day, especially when they've got hypoglycemia. And so oftentimes little meals throughout the day can be helpful, though in referencing biochemical individuality, we'll explore intermittent fasting later. So this is where knowing your client and your client's needs will come into your goal setting. Remember to add a snack right before sleep if you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night, unable to fall back asleep. Another goal that could be an initial goal is to decrease the stimulant foods. This is particularly with our anxious and panicky clients. Reduce or eliminate sugar and refined foods. I think that goes without saying, should be among the first goals. And as we talk later about substitution principles, I'll give you some tricks for doing that. Eliminate the enriched foods. They're often enriched with synthetic vitamins that are not good for us at all and don't really promote our health and well-being. Plan your shopping and your food menu in advance. This would be a behavioral goal to begin to get into a rhythm of self-care. Obtain a crock pot and prepare at least one fresh meal a day. I think that's a great goal for everyone to have for themselves. Choose from a spectrum of foods. We don't want to get bored with what we're eating. And we all are going to exist along a spectrum from being either a carnivore or a vegetarian. And as our module proceeds, I'll share with you the science behind that and the art of food preparation. But no matter what, we're going to choose from proteins, whether they're animal, fish, dairy, nut, or legumes. As you know, I prefer goat and sheep dairy, unless our cow's milk dairy is fermented. Eggs, 1 to 3 daily, is an ideal source of protein for the brain. Meats, and don't be afraid of your saturated fats. Coconut, olive, sesame oil, and raw butter, and raw nuts. Think about this as your core approach to a spectrum of foods. Include your root vegetables. Your soluble fibers contained in flax and oatmeal, psyllium seed, your fruits and vegetables, and your fresh greens, both raw and cooked. Fermented foods are essential to a good mood diet. Fruit, focus on your berries, and then of course your grains. There are many people that'll benefit from grains, whether they're gluten or non-gluten. Knowing yourself and your client's needs are going to be the key to that. And we'll explore this a little bit later as we look at gluten sensitivity in particular. The kitchen is your pharmacy. It's your drugstore. What are some of the best foods for your mood? Organic beef, lamb, chicken, very rich in protein, high in amino acids for our neurotransmitter function. Pinto beans are among the best bean if you're going to be a bean eater. And later I'm going to share with you a little bit about adding chocolate to your chili. And pinto beans make a great chili. Eggs, salmon or tuna, only wild or wild canned. Olive oil, raw, unsalted butter, coconut fat, sweet potatoes, blueberries, raspberries, lemons, oats, green tea, coffee, beets. Beets are very good for the methylation process, very good for mood, and the perfect food for our liver and gallbladder. Basil, figs, and bitter greens like arugula, dandelion, and watercress. Antidepressant and anti-inflammatory foods. These are rich in anthocyanins, the red and blue color that gives our berries their bright look. This also includes cherries and jamaica, also the roselle that you'll hear me talk about throughout our course. Turmeric, rich in curcumin and ginger. Mix turmeric with black pepper for absorption. This is what Indian cooking knows so well about making homemade chai, mixing turmeric, ginger, black tea, or green tea. Vitamin D and E are antidepressant, papaya and bromelain, fish oil, and there have been a number of studies of saffron, both alone and combined with curcumin to treat depression. So use plenty of saffron and turmeric in your food daily. What about fermented foods to feed our second brain? There's evidence that kimchi is used to decrease depression and anxiety. It's also been found to improve mood and increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor in the hippocampus. And I suspect it's not just kimchi, but many fermented foods, such as sauerkraut, will have this effect. And here you see some beautiful cabbage and some pickled or fermented beets and fermented sauerkraut. Meet humbaba. Humbaba is the sevenfold terror whose breath is death. And humbaba is an ancient Mesopotamian mythic creature who represents the colon. And the ancients called him the breath of death, and we know that the breath of death, bad breath, is a sign of a fermenting colon and a fermenting food in the stomach. And this is where fermented foods come in, to break down this fermentation process in the colon. So what are some foods that you may not be familiar with that will enhance this fermented process and give you some options for improving your health? Natto and miso. I think we're familiar with miso, the use of miso, miso soup, and miso in salad dressings. Natto is a little less well known, but a very powerful fermented food that produces an enzyme called nattokinase. Natto is made from fermented soybeans, And it's rich in iron, calcium, magnesium. It's high in protein, potassium, and the following vitamins. This enzyme is found not only in the natto, but it's also now made into supplements that you can take as a fibrinolytic agent, which means it's an anti-clotting agent. So if you're on blood thinners or you have problems with blood clotting, you want to talk with your prescriber before taking too much natto. But we know that thinning the blood can be very helpful for many heart problems, for example. It's also been used for fibromyalgia, pain, and chronic fatigue. And in my practice, I see a lot of the intersection of heart dis-ease, heart problems, and PTSD. And so as we work throughout our module today, think about your clients who've experienced trauma, who also have co-occurring heart problems, circulatory problems, atherosclerosis, and the role of foods and how those foods can improve their well-being, and often working with the prescriber to decrease some of the medications they may be taking or preventing them having to get on medications. Natto has a unique process. It's one of the highest sources of vitamin K12, which is very essential for bone health. It makes it a very, what we'd call, medicinal food. Now, miso is also a fermented soy, but miso may be made also out of barley or rice. And I recommend, if you're new to miso, find what's called a white miso. That's a very mild tasting miso. And keep in mind about how to use soy. Soy should be avoided except when it's fermented. An occasional bit of tofu is okay, but use soy only in its fermented form. Miso, shoyu, or a good quality soy sauce, tempeh, natto. Soy has high levels of phytic acid. It decreases digestive enzymes. It lowers thyroid function. It's high in protease inhibitors. It decreases pancreatic enzymes. And it interferes with the assimilation of calcium, magnesium, copper, iron, and zinc. And so get off the soy milk, get off the fake soy, and use it only in fermented. Then it becomes medicine. Spices and mental health. We're going to have some fun in the kitchen. Sea salt. Don't be afraid of salt, but when you use salt, use a good quality sea salt. It's very rich in minerals that support mental health. When we're thinking about using kitchen spices and condiments, we think about the smell of them and how they boost our mood and calm us down. We think about what they're going to taste like. For example, basil and oregano are best used when fresh. In a pinch, if they're dry, you can use them as well in a great red sauce or in a salad dressing, but fresh is the best way to go with these two herbs. On the other hand, cardamom, cinnamon, also which boost mood and decrease anxiety, are used best in dry form. And all dried herbs should be stored in a cool, dry place. One exercise that you can do is begin your herb garden. Let's look at our three hot cousins, ginger, turmeric, and saffron. Turmeric contains curcumin. It's a potent antidepressant. There's been a great amount of research on this. It's an anti-inflammatory. It should be incorporated into every diet, and particularly if you're depressed or in pain. And turmeric can be bought as a powder. Be aware of the source of the turmeric. It should be a nice bright orange. But also you can buy it as a fresh root. And it is fairly inexpensive if you can find it at your local Indian food store. Ginger. Fresh ginger root is easily obtained. Keep some in your pantry for use every day. I just made some coconut almond meal muffins today and added some fresh sliced ginger to them to give it a little pop. Add your ginger into your stir fries with your vegetables or your proteins. Add it to soup. Add it to a citrus-based smoothie if you're in a bad mood. We know that ginger stimulates the liver, and in Chinese medicine, the belief is that anger lives in the liver. So drink your ginger tea to release some of that anger and release some of that bile or that gall that you experience. There's good scientific evidence that ginger is effective for reducing nausea in pregnancy and in chemotherapy. And ginger suppresses inflammatory responses in the body. And I've given you a good reference for this. I ask all of my patients who have fibromyalgia to make a ginger turmeric tea daily. Garlic. We all know the benefits of garlic for heart health. I mentioned earlier it's very high in sulfur, which is very good for detoxifying. It's a very natural antibiotic. Before the discovery of penicillin, garlic was used as a major antibiotic, both internally and externally. It's a good antifungal. And the reason I mention these physical symptoms is that chronic stress, depression, and PTSD, for example, all lower immune function, making people more vulnerable to bacterial and viral as well as fungal infections. Yeast infections, for example, both externally and internally. So eating lots of fresh or slightly cooked garlic daily is a good approach. And I love to take a nice big bulb like this, put a little olive oil in it, and then put it into my oven and cook up some garlic, and then it'll come out of its encasing very easily, and it's a nice treat with salad or with a protein dish. I love this quote from Joan Di Gassau: "As for butter versus margarine, I trust cows more than chemists." And I think that says it all about our approach to culinary medicine. Butter is better. The best butter is raw and unpasteurized. You, of course, want to make sure of the quality of your source and the cleanliness of the farm. Butter is a very good source of K2. It's found in butter fat. There's such a thing called the Wulzen factor, defined by Dr. Wulzen back in the 40s. He found that butter protects against calcification in the body. It prevents and decreases arthritis, joint stiffness, and pain. Another byproduct of butter that you can make or buy is called ghee, well known in Indian and East Asian food as medicine. It's an ideal fat for those who may be lactose intolerant because all of the milk proteins are eliminated from ghee. It has a high smoke point, which makes it ideal for cooking. It's good for digestion. And in Ayurvedic medicine, ghee is a yoga vahi. And that means it's a catalytic agent that carries the medicinal properties of the herbs that you're cooking with into the tissues. And ghee is also used as a topical method for driving these herbal constituents into the body. So experiment with ghee and see how you like it. It's not just enough to have a good quality oil, but knowing how oils can be preserved is very important. And when you're buying oil, particularly looking at the chlorophyll-rich oils like olive oil, you want to purchase it either in a dark green or a dark brown bottle or in a can, because light exposure destroys the nutrients of oil. And so make sure when you're shopping, that will let you know the good quality of oils. And we know that there's been adulteration of oils, particularly coming out of Spain and Italy. The oils coming out of California and Chile and Greece tend to be higher quality oils, particularly the olive oils. Or do your research if you're buying from Italy and from Spain. You want your oil to be cold pressed. It's often called virgin or extra virgin. It should be a dark green color, a dark bottle or can, and store it away from light. Use olive oil in your salad dressings, less for cooking, and drizzle it over your steamed fresh green vegetables. And you can also mix olive oil with a little bit of butter for your vegetables. What are the best fats for mental health? Remember not to be afraid of saturated fats. Without saturated fats, we can't absorb our vitamins. And remember, fats and greens go together. Mix your butter and steamed vegetables and sea salt. You've got a great treat for your adrenal glands. They support mood and mental stamina. The fats help absorb all of those rich vitamins and minerals in the greens. Choose coconut oil. It's a medium chain fatty acid. It bypasses the liver for digestion. It's easily digested. We know there's good research that supports its use for brain and for memory. Cook with it, add it to smoothies, use it in baked goods, rub it on dry skin. And don't forget to drink the water. It's rich in electrolytes. Sesame oil. This is an oil very commonly used in Ayurvedic medicine. You can have it raw or toasted, mix it with a vegetable stir fry. You can mix it with olive oil as a dressing. And if you have any kind of gum disease, periodontal disease, a traditional Ayurvedic recipe is to take 2 tablespoons of raw, untoasted sesame oil, swish it around in your mouth for about 10 minutes, and then spit it out right before bed. We know that there's an association between gum disease and heart disease and the development of dementia, really rooted in the inflammatory process in the body. I'd like to share with you now one of my favorite recipes about how to get good quality oil in every day. We've discussed adding it to smoothies, but how about making what I call the Brain Bolt salad dressing? This involves mixing virgin olive oil, 1/4 cup of hemp oil, and you can get hemp oil in the refrigerated section in your local market, flaxseed oil, and this is going to give you lots of good omega-6s and omega-9s, very good for the brain, very good for skin. Then you can add some balsamic vinegar, some raw apple cider vinegar, and remember, don't grab your vinegars off the shelf, but get them that are unpasteurized and freshly bottled. If they have a mother in them, all the better. 6 tablespoons of dark agave if you want a little bit of sweet, or raw honey, but many people will have the salad dressing without any sweetener added, or add a little stevia. A teaspoon of sea salt, add your minced cloves of garlic and then fresh ground pepper. Shake and store it in the fridge, and you have a wonderful dressing that will last you for a week. And you can put it in separate bottles if you're going to run out to a restaurant where you know that they might have good food but not good quality salad dressing, and you can share it with your friends for lunch. Vinegars. Vinegar will boost your mood, it will boost your energy, and again, it's important to get a good quality vinegar. I particularly favor apple cider vinegar, and there's some research suggesting it's very helpful for blood glucose control. When it's made with apples, it's rich in the anthocyanins, high in vitamin C, it's antimicrobial, so it's very good if you've got an infection of any sort, both topically in your bath as well as eating it. And I use it in my clinical practice to reduce anxiety. And I've provided you with a recipe that includes vinegar in the drink as an anti-anxiety drink. Let's talk a little bit about bitter greens and the role of bitter greens in fat digestion. Eat your dandelions. Pick them in the spring, but don't spray them. Here you see a dish that I made of fresh dandelions in a little bit of coconut oil. Bitter greens are medicine for the liver and should be a part of everybody's, if not daily diet, certainly weekly diet. Always have some bitter greens when you're having a high-fat meal. The bitters, the bitterness in the greens will help you digest the fat more efficiently. If you're not going to have a lot of bitter greens, and they do require adjusting your taste a little bit and cultivating a taste for the bitters, there are nutrients that you can take. And I wanted to share this with you now, though we'll review it during our nutritional supplements module. There are some wonderful products out there that replicate the effects of the bitter greens and the bitters and the fat emulsification that we need. This is especially important for people who have had their gallbladder removed or whose gallbladder is just a little sluggish. And remember, the worst thing you can do for your gallbladder is eat low fat. If you don't have enough fat, your gallbladder will get more sluggish, and then it will stop moving, and then you have a collection of waste, and then bile and bile salts and stones. So don't be afraid of fat with gallbladder challenges. I'm going to show you in the detox section how to flush that gallbladder and the foods to eat for your gallbladder. So what are they? Betaine, which is found in high quantities in beets and in beet juice, taurine, the amino acid, and vitamin C. And you can find this in supplement form. Sometimes it's called beta-TCP. This is going to aid your digestion of fats, particularly if you have impaired gallbladder function. Bile salts, you can get ox bile salts, which will be useful if you don't have a gallbladder. Inositol, which is a type of B vitamin, helps your gallbladder and helps you emulsify fats. Pancreatic enzymes. Silmarin, found in milk thistle, is very good for your liver and helps you emulsify. In the detox section of our training, I'm going to talk with you about phase 2 detoxification, particularly the use of coffee enemas, and then of course liver glandular and phosphatidylcholine, a phospholipid to support liver function, particularly good and fatty liver. Here is a whole slide really that gives you what you need to know to improve fat digestion in the body, with or without a gallbladder. And the reason fat emulsification is so important is we need it for our brain. We need to metabolize it and use it. Let's talk about organ meats, not often on our menu. I want to share with you through this training and module some things that are just off the beaten path a little bit and share why they're so healthy for many of us. Today, we might still go to a gourmet restaurant and have liver pate, chopped liver during the holidays, sweetbreads, which are made of thymus and pancreas. Dried salami is often made from organ meats. Chicken liver pate, prepared beef, goat, or lung in the form of chanfaina. Menudo, made in Mexico and Spain, made from cow stomach and intestines. Haggis, Scottish treat made from sheep stomach, stuffed with cooked oats, blood, and organ meat. And blood pudding, kidneys, goat and pork testicles, tongue, heart, pancreas, bone gels, and head cheese. These are all wonderful, traditional, authentic foods from around the world that have traditionally nourished our ancestors. So explore the role of organ meats in your life. I'd like to share another few types of foods that you'll be interested in integrating into your special diets. Let's talk about medicinal mushrooms for mental health. There are a variety of values to mushroom. Our general button mushrooms are very high in selenium, which is very helpful for our immune function. But there are some particular medicinal mushrooms, shiitake and lion's mane in particular. Shiitake, which is easily accessed, is rich in B vitamins, B6, which is very good for neurotransmitter synthesis, niacin, choline, and folates. They're rich in minerals like selenium, copper, zinc, and manganese, all important for immune function and neurotransmitter synthesis. Lion's mane is especially good for the brain and the nervous system, and in some research was found to improve mild cognitive impairment. And when I'm working with clients who are beginning to feel like either they're vulnerable to cognitive decline because of their APOE gene, or if they're just feeling like they need more mental energy and cognitive speed, I will suggest lion's mane. And in the resource section, I've given you some wonderful resources for high quality medicinal mushrooms that you can certainly grow for yourself or that you can buy in dehydrated form. Let's talk for a few minutes about plant proteins, some that you'll know and some that may be new for you. A microalgae. Look at this beautiful bright green, rich with chlorophyll. Spirulina and chlorella. If you're a student of Mexican medicinal foods, you know that the ancient Aztecs lived on spirulina and chlorella as a very important food source and source of protein and chlorophyll for the body. And it's very easy to get a good quality spirulina and put it into your smoothie. If you're still developing the capacity to cook fresh greens and eat raw foods, this is what I suggest to clients who may be new to eating green foods. We've got our peas, both fresh and as dried legumes. And there's nothing like a fresh pea soup topped with a little cream or a pea soup mixed with lentils, and you can add, make it as a vegetarian soup or add some sausage to it. And you may find pea plant protein powder is a very high quality source of plant protein if you want to make an occasional meal out of just plant proteins. For example, if you're in a rush one day and you can't cook, you can create a smoothie out of pea proteins. It's preferable to rice protein, for example, or certainly soy protein. So what about this beautiful bright green of plants coming from chlorophyll? Chlorophyll is also called the blood of plants. And chlorophyll is just one molecule different from our own blood. And it is very rich in magnesium, whereas we have iron. And that is what makes the difference. It's very similar to our heme. And so think about chlorophyll as the blood of plants. It's what gives plants their bright green look, and it's involved with photosynthesis. Chlorophyll has been researched extensively as a deodorizer, as a cleanser. And so it's very important to take chlorophyll in some form daily. Research has been done with people who've had colostomies, that the taking of chlorophyll reduces the odor of the waste eliminated. And so think about chlorophyll as your friend in your daily diet to deodorize, to cleanse, and to be part of your detoxification process. It's the pigment that gives plants and algae their green color. And the basic structure of chlorophyll, as I mentioned, is similar to the heme in our own hemoglobin. Supplementation with chlorophyll before meals has been shown to decrease the aflatoxin. The urinary biomarker that I mentioned is the carcinogenic fungus found on peanuts and other types of legumes. The Chinese did some interesting research here because of the high rates of liver cancer in some of their population with the relationship between aflatoxin and liver cancer. So consider peanut butter or peanuts an occasional treat, but they're not the best nuts for you. But use your chlorophyll to detoxify your aflatoxin. Chlorophyll's also been studied as a topical agent, as an ointment for wound healing. I like to use chlorophyll as a supplement, and I've given you some resources for this. I certainly have a lot of leafy greens in my diet, but I also will take a chlorophyll supplement that's made from alfalfa. Alfalfa is very high in phytoestrogens, genistein, and coumestrol. And there's been a lot of good research on the role of alfalfa as a detoxifying agent. More plant proteins. We all know the value of broccoli and the cruciferous vegetables. They're anti-carcinogenic, they're antioxidant, they're anti-inflammatory. They aid phase 2 detoxification in the liver. They've also been found to be useful with glucoraphanin for the use of the neurodevelopmental disorders, particularly autism. It was found to reduce oxidative stress and improve mitochondrial function, and thereby improve behaviors. 30 milligrams a day was used in this research. And remember, too much of the whole cruciferous vegetable every day can lead to depressed thyroid function. So know who you are individually and what your needs are for the use of these cruciferous gifts. Kelp is the new kale. I think we have emerged from our kale craze and we are moving into our seaweed craze. So I want to share with you what the Irish and the Japanese and peoples all along the coast who've eaten seaweed for millennia know. These sea vegetables are excellent for your health, both mental and physical. They're rich in minerals, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, iron, iodine, very good for thyroid function, very good for immune function, and therefore very good to lift depression. Anyone who's depressed should be taking seaweed at least a few times a week. Now we know the brown seaweeds are very good because their alginates bind oxidizing radiation and heavy metals. And when we discuss detox later on, we will explore how to use this and what the protocol is. In the meantime, I've given you some resources for seaweeds, and I want to share with you one of my favorite recipes for seaweed. Nori contains 1.5 times more vitamin C than oranges. It's rich in iodine and rich in all of these vitamins and minerals. It's a good source of protein, and it's very good for reducing body weight. So one of the best recipes to start with if you're cultivating a taste for seaweed is this recipe that I call my seaweed salad recipe. And I use arame. And the reason I use this is it's a very simple, easy to obtain in organic form seaweed that is a very mild taste in contrast to wakame or nori, for example. And so I have a series of photos here to show you step by step how to make this delicious seaweed salad while your friends at your next potluck, but also to share with your clients as a recipe in your waiting room. So you'll see that I have a handful of the dry seaweed here. I'm going to then place it in a little bit of water and just cover it and let it plump up and rehydrate over the next 3 hours. And this is then what it looks like. I'm going to drain this off well. I'm going to save the liquid for my plants, because there's nothing like seaweed fertilizer for your plants. Or if you don't have plants, you can save it in the freezer and add it to a soup at another time. It's a strong taste, so use it in measured amounts. And then you see I've got all of my wonderful chopped vegetables. My scallions, my carrots, my pea pods, red pepper, cucumber. I've got a handful of raw broccoli. And then I love to add nuts, either walnuts or pine nuts to this mix. And then if you can get some good sprouts, you can add some sprouts. And you can tell this is also not only going to be delicious, but it's very crunchy, and it's going to satisfy a sensory need to crunch and chew and really eat a delicious food. Now I'm going to show you the dressing. You're going to mix this with toasted sesame oil, a little bit of rice wine vinegar, some wheat-free tamari or shoyu, a couple of cloves of garlic, a chunk of fresh ginger, all mashed well, and maybe a dash of hot pepper if you want a little bit of pizzazz to this. And so I've added all of my vegetables to the seaweed. I'm now going to pour the dressing over it, mix it well, cover it, and place it in the fridge. It'll be ready in a few hours because I want all of those delicious tastes to merge together, or even the next day it's going to be superb. And there is a delicious way to begin your adventures in the joys of eating seaweed. And it's good for you. I'd like to share yet another recipe with you. I think we're also going to be moving into the use of cactus or cacti as medicine. And one of the most easily accessed cactus is the nopali cactus, also called prickly pear. It's the Opuntia species, and you may have seen on the Mexican flag the cactus as part of the insignia. So revered and central is this wonderful plant in the lives of people of Mexico. The nopali cactus has been studied by the Mexican government for its use and utility for lowering blood sugar, and it's particularly useful in diabetes type 2. But we all benefit from managing our blood sugar. Remember, stress raises our blood sugar. So incorporate this as a special treat, certainly monthly in your diet. You can get it in dehydrated form, but you can make some delicious meals with it. Why not? And if you live in an area where you can grow cactus or pick it fresh, why not? It's rich in manganese, and combined with fiber is what lowers the absorption of blood glucose. So remember, it's not just the rate at which we absorb blood glucose, but it's also the amount of blood glucose or glucose that we're taking into our system. And so, for example, if you look at traditional Mexican breakfasts prior to the epidemic that we now see with diabetes type 2, what were really part and parcel of these traditional authentic meals? Nopales and cinnamon tea, both of which are very anti-glycemic. And with the advent of modern foods, the SAD diet, this traditional breakfast has gone the wayside, certainly among many people who've been found their ways in urban environments. I think people still living in rural environments are adhering to these traditional foods. And indeed, we see this when we look at people who live on both sides of the border, who are from the same indigenous groups. One group living in the south side in Mexico eating traditional foods like nopali, cinnamon tea, have no diabetes, and the same family members living on the north side who eat the SAD diet having high rates of diabetes. So nopali is a wonderful, fun vegetable that you can eat both raw and cooked. And remember the principle of mucilaginous foods: chia, flax, slippery elm bark, nopali. These are all foods that are mucousy and slimy, and it's very good for you because it's very soothing to the mucous membranes, very soothing to digestion. Now, some people are not going to appreciate it, and so you put it off to the side, and that's not going to be your food. But I want to encourage you to use nopali. You can throw it into your green smoothie with your spinach or your kale, and very delicious. It has a very light lemony flavor to it. You can cook it in eggs. You can add it to salads. And you see here, I have some chopped nopali. Now, when you buy it in the market, you'll find it, usually the little spines will be taken off, but if you're picking it fresh, you want to make sure that you take the spines off. Chop up the nopali into little cubes, and then think about what you'd like to add to it. You can add any kind of vegetable. You can add finely chopped lettuce, chopped tomato and onion, a little bit of garlic, and then I like to put a little bit of olive oil and squeeze a little bit of lemon over it, and then I mix it up, and then voila, we've got a delicious raw cactus salad. And if you want to top it with some nuts, you've added some protein to it. Now here, you'll see nopalis that I made. I just saved some of those chopped nopalis, and I stir-fried them into my scrambled eggs, and I had them in the morning. So you've got lots of option with nopali, and you're going to wow your friends with this exotic new dish that's good for your mental and physical health. Nopalis contribute fiber to our diet, and remember, fiber in all of these plant proteins become our probiotics. They set the stage for our second brain. So our fibers and our mucilaginous foods, which slow the absorptions of sugar into the intestines. Flaxseed, pectin from apples. It's why apples and apple peels are so good for us. Guar gum, seaweeds are also mucilaginous. They're highly beneficial, and research suggests from 80 to 100 grams per day is ideal. And you can switch out and rotate all of these different gifts that nature has given us. Now I'd like to shift gears and talk about specific symptoms and imbalances that we can address with food. You've heard me talk quite a bit about blood sugar and blood glucose uptake, and I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about reactive hypoglycemia and its role in destabilizing mood. Reactive hypoglycemia occurs in response to an excessive release of insulin following a high refined carbohydrate meal. This is in contrast to what's called primary hypoglycemia, when there's an inadequate supply of carbohydrates in the diet. Most people that we see with mood instability or any kind of moodiness and irritability that are on a refined food diet will have some reactive hypoglycemia. And so this may be one of your first goals in stabilizing mood. Hypoglycemia, which is also called low blood glucose, occurs when the level of glucose in the blood drops below normal. And this drop can lead to irritability, anxiety, nervousness, craving sweets, panic, crying, fainting, all kinds of changes in personality, headaches, visual disturbances, shakiness. And I think we've all had the experience of perhaps we've been in a meeting or we've worked for too long without eating, or we begin to feel what that feels like, where you start to get shaky, or maybe you've worked out for too long without previously eating some food. Any number of things can lead to this, but certainly chronic stress sets the stage, and chronic use of refined carbohydrates. Hypoglycemia, reactive hypoglycemia, can be mistaken for anxiety, worry, bipolar symptoms, inability to focus, temper tantrums, hyperactivity, and depression. And this is why stabilizing food intake for blood glucose is going to give you results in all of these areas and symptoms. This is important when you're assessing for mood changes. This is a very practical approach to understand what kind of role food intake and food timing can have on mood changes throughout the day. And this is where the food mood diary comes in again. So I want to rule out reactive hypoglycemia along with food allergies or other medical conditions when I'm assessing for mood. Now, children and adults with severe mood swings and irritability are going to experience improvement. It may not be the whole picture, but I've seen 25, 50%, even 75% improvement in mood. And then you begin to reassess what's really contributing to the moodiness or the irritability. I always, when I'm seeing someone with a diagnosis of bipolar, I always want to address the potential for reactive hypoglycemia. I also want to assess for reactive hypoglycemia in people with the diagnosis of ADHD. We also see hypoglycemia in people with the psychotic disorders, with schizophrenia, often because food intake can be erratic. It's often very high carbohydrate, high refined carbohydrates. And in particular, we see this with people who don't have access to good quality foods, or people that are on the street or are homeless. So these are all populations to consider when you're exploring mood and mood lability. People under chronic stress, as we've discussed, are vulnerable to reactive hypoglycemia. And people who complain about feeling foggy or they can't focus or think straight, these are all signs that they may be taking in too many refined carbohydrates, their blood sugar's dropping, and they need more protein and fat in their diet and more complex carbs. We see hypoglycemia commonly in alcohol addiction, drug and food addictions, and in addition to high carbohydrate meals, smoking cigarettes can increase hypoglycemia. People with hypoglycemia can be deficient in essential fatty acids, so this is one of the first directions to take. And if you're interested in testing for essential fatty acid status, there's a blood spot test in the resource section that you can find out about. It's a home test. You want to begin by replacing your refined carbohydrate consumption with high-quality proteins and fats. Eat organic, starchy, and non-starchy vegetables as the primary sources of the carbs. Eat small amounts, and this is very important in recovering from reactive hypoglycemia. Eating every 2, 3, 4 hours in small amounts to keep blood sugar up can be very helpful for maintaining mood and energy. And then I'll also, in this kind of situation where there's moodiness, depression, or mood lability, ADHD, lack of focus and attention, up and down, carbohydrate addiction, I want to support the adrenal glands by using adaptogenic herbs, which we'll explore during the herbal module. I want to use that wonderful sea salt and lots of good proteins. I might also use an herbal or adaptogenic glandular called adrenal glandular. Now, people with hypoglycemia or without are often reaching for comfort foods. Indeed, what is mental distress but experiencing discomfort. And so we all tend to grab comfort foods when we're under stress, when we're feeling depressed, or when we've had an upset of some sort. So I want to next explore this idea of comfort foods and how to help your clients choose healthy comfort foods. Usually, comfort foods are rich in sugar and refined carbohydrates. They're high in fat, generally poor quality fats, and these sugars and fats release opiates in the brain, the endogenous opioids that create a pleasure response and kind of dull us and even put us to sleep. That's what makes them comforting. So what about comfort food and mental health? We turn to these foods at times of stress, but we can use foods as part of our self-care, self-comfort strategy. So reframing how we're comforting ourselves, how we're nourishing ourselves, can turn the use from the foods that are not giving us the benefits that we're really seeking to identifying truly sustaining comfort foods. Let's talk about chocolate, one of the best comfort foods there is, also called shoko atol, the food of the gods. And the reason chocolate was considered, and still is considered, the food of the gods is from the term theobromine, one of the active substances that raises and increases our mood and focus, from the term theobroma, meaning food of the gods. And clearly endemic to Mexico and brought to Europe after contact, chocolate has long been revered as a ritual food and a food that alters mind and body. And I love this quote from Charles Schulz: "All you need is love, but a little chocolate now and then doesn't hurt." Remember Charles Schulz, the creator of the Peanuts character. Now, to the right here, you see a chocolate pod. This is what chocolate looks like before it is processed and refined into that wonderful dark or milk chocolate we so love. And to the left, I've shown you a picture of mitochondria, because we know from research that chocolate increases mitochondrial function. And mitochondrial function is essential for good mental health. We know that poor mitochondrial function is underneath all mental illness. Is it the sole cause? No, but it co-occurs. So anything we can eat and do to improve mitochondrial function, improve the function of our little engines that could in our brain and in our cells, then we're going to see improvement in our mental well-being. So what are the benefits of chocolate? They're anti-inflammatory. They're rich in flavonols, which are antioxidants. Epicatechin is the highest in chocolate of anywhere in the food world. Second, green tea has the second largest amount. And the general dose of this very important flavanol is about 1 to 2 milligrams of body weight, meaning for every kilogram that you have about 1 to 2 milligrams of epicatechin per day to get your most profound effects on your mitochondrial function and your anti-inflammatory function. We know that the bitter element in chocolate is very good for the liver. We know that evidence shows that chocolate reduces C-reactive protein, a sign of inflammation in the body. We find now there are even types of chocolate that are made that increase the epicatechin and lower the sugar, because sugar decreases the effects of the benefits of chocolate. And later I'm going to share with you a wonderful recipe that you can make chocolate almond joys. We know that chocolate has a prebiotic function in the gut. It enhances the gut bacteria. So when you eat chocolate, it's not just good for your mood in your first brain, it's good for your second brain to grow more healthy bacteria. In the first brain, it increases our endorphins, it increases dopamine, which helps our focus, it increases magnesium levels, and this is in large part, I think, why women especially crave chocolate and crave chocolate at particular times in the menstrual cycle, because chocolate rich in magnesium relaxes muscles and therefore relaxes uterine contractions. And of course, theobromine, rich with caffeine, is a cough suppressant. And we use chocolate also as an anti-asthma treatment. It's a vasodilator and improves circulation and mood. And I've given you some references for the benefits of chocolate. So when you're making chocolate or eating chocolate, make sure it's dark. The less processing of your chocolate means there's more of the flavonols, the antioxidants. Bitter means it's good for the liver. Don't use any sugar or certainly no artificial sweetener. 8 to 20 grams a day in research shows it gives you the medicinal effect. Combine it with cocoa and coconut oil, green tea and berries in your smoothie. Add it to your smoothies for a natural energy boost. I've given you some recipes for making healthy cocoa. That's with organic, pure cocoa, no additives involved. A chocolate almond joy recipe. Add chocolate to your favorite bean chili dish. It's in your mocha matcha smoothie, and you've got twice the catechins in your not only your chocolate, but your green tea. And here, for fun, go out and buy a molinillo. This is a traditional chocolate frother. And you hold the molinillo, and between your hands, you froth up your chocolate. And so you can have a wonderful cultural lesson along with the delicious food as you boost your mood. As we continue talking about comfort foods, let's look at comfort for anxiety and muscle tension. Some of the best anxiolytic foods to reduce muscle tension and its co-occurring anxiety is dark beer, a good quality dark beer. And if you're not contraindicated for alcohol, a quarter to a half cup, about 4 ounces of dark beer, rich in hops, rich in magnesium, and in a pinch, it's a good medicinal food. Oats are a good anxiolytic food. 1 cup of Epsom salts, as we've discussed, in a bath, and then lavender oil essence, both rubbed on your hands or used through a diffuser. Put all this together for yourself, soak in a warm tub with Epsom salts. It's a good approach to anxiety and muscle tension. What are some more foods that are good for anxiety? Bananas, figs, vinegar, and oats. I haven't created a recipe, though, to put all those together. You might. Let's talk a little bit about oats. They're better eaten later in the day because they are so relaxing. Make sure you get steel-cut oats. And this is where your crock pot can come in, where you can cook them for 4 hours and even keep it on low. And you've got for several days some fresh oats that you can grab, and you can season them as you wish. Steel-cut oats are rich in silicon, phosphorus, and magnesium, all calming and nourishing minerals. You can use a little blackstrap molasses sweetener, not too much, but very rich in vitamins, high in iron and copper. Make sure you get the real blackstrap molasses. It's very strong, so you don't need too much. And then you can add some raisins and walnuts, which are very good for relaxation and sleep. What are some comforting foods that we use for eating disorders in general? There's evidence that whey is very relaxing and calming, particularly for people who experience bulimia. The tryptophan-rich foods, healthy fats, the complex carbs. Later on, when we look at yoga and body work for bulimia, I'll return to an integrated approach to the treatment of bulimia and purging, and also integrating different nutrients. What are some of the benefits of whey protein? Whey is evolved out of the cheese-making process. It's low in lactose. It's got 9 of the essential amino acids. And it's found in research to be very satiating because it alters some of the protein peptides in the gut. And so for people with night eating disorder or who have cravings or with bulimia, it's recommended to use whey in smoothies. And the findings show good results for decreasing some of those behaviors. Some of the research also added glucomannan, which is a fiber that also adds a bulking agent. And we know that bulk through fiber also increases satiety. Orthorexia is something I'd like to take a moment to discuss now. Orthorexia, while it's not in the DSM-5, may still be a stigmatized experience that people have. And we may see this in our practice, especially with people who are extremely attentive, or perhaps we may feel over-attentive or overly obsessed with their diet. Now, this is kind of an interesting challenge to discern, and this is where we bring the art of our work, because someone may need to be almost obsessed with what they eat if they've experienced poor mental health and poor digestion, and they're in a recovery mode. And so what may seem obsessive to one may be just the medicine through food that one needs to recover. So I want to talk a little bit about that spectrum and the experience I've seen in my own clinical practice. Orthorexia nervosa is defined really as a fixation on righteous eating. The idea that there's only one way to do it and only one way for the individual to do it, and it may extend or may not into how other people behave, but that someone becomes very or excessively focused on what they're eating. For example, I had a client that would almost go into a panic attack if she ate in a restaurant, and she found out after she ate the bowl of soup that it had been made with a meat broth. And so while as a vegetarian, she wanted to adhere to a vegetarian diet, part of our work was to help her plan in advance, ask questions, and then learn some breathing and recognize and find a way to give thanks to the animal that had given its body part to the meat broth. And so there are a whole variety of ways that we may encounter orthorexia in our practice. For example, people in addiction recovery, while they tend not to be at all coming into recovery focused on their diet, they may grab onto dietary change, and rightly so, as one pathway to improving their mental health and staying on the righteous path to recovery. We see this kind of obsessive behaviors that are often essential for recovery. For example, coming off drug abuse and obsessing about exercise. We go back to the old concept of the positive addiction. And so consider orthorexia as often a stage in someone's recovery, where people often need to focus and even obsess on these changes and doing things exactly right for what they've defined or what we've helped them define for themselves, but that it's a stage that they will pass through. We see this in people with chemical sensitivity. I had a client whose whole neuroimmunological system broke down in response to exposure to heavy chemicals as a result of her job. And she had to really refine into very few foods what she could eat for a number of years. And she couldn't go places. She was both reactive emotionally as well as physically, biologically. And so we did have to work with the understanding of a team of what she needed to have to recover her health. And there were people in her life who didn't understand what the dis-ease was about, and we had to do family education, friend education. so that she could eventually begin to go places, be invited out for meals without the reactions from friends who didn't understand, who were going to stigmatize that. We see orthorexia sometimes in veganism, raw food diets, vegetarian diets. I've seen this often in my college-age clients who've gone off to college and they've jumped on the bandwagon of the latest diet for them. I've seen it when I've been working with deprogramming cult survivors who were part of a cult where certain foods were eaten, certain foods were not allowed. So we see orthorexia at many stages of life and many stages of the path. And I think we're particularly oriented in mental health to combine our understanding of both the meaning of orthorexia in an individual's life, along with understanding the dietary needs and the changes. And we can also collaborate with other clinicians on this subject as well, about clients. So speaking of alcohol and drug recovery, let's talk about some comfort foods that will aid alcohol and drug recovery. We want to have foods that are easily digested, nutrient-dense, and collagen-rich. Most collagen comes out of animal protein, whether it's bone broth, chicken broth, or even fish broth. We get it from bones in general, bones and connective tissue. When we're in recovery, we want to have easily prepared, easily assimilated and digested foods because the organs of digestion are often impaired. They've been underused, they've been overused. Any number of problems may exist along the way from north to south in the digestive process. So think about your bone broths. Also think about a juice, once a day, a juice. One of my favorites that I've developed, the carrot, beet, apple jubilee. Carrots, beets, and apples all bring vitamins and minerals to liver and gallbladder recovery. They also have a good amount of sugar, and part of alcohol recovery in particular is about coming off of alcohol sugars. And so this is a good transitional food. Not only is it rich in sugar and it's satisfying and feeds that hungry liver, but it also is very good for the liver itself medicinally with high levels of vitamin A, high levels of betaine. And I've given you the recipe here of how to make it. I like to add a little bit of coconut oil to this juice once I juice it because the coconut oil is going to help a lot of the nutrients be absorbed. And it's a very easily absorbed oil for people who are in recovery. So think about your coconut oil in alcohol and drug recovery, whatever the drugs of choice have been. Collagen and amino acids are part of the gelatin that we know. And I don't mean old Jell-O, though I'm going to share with you a good healthy Jell-O that you can make. Gelatin is actually a pretty inexpensive source of protein. So where accessibility or quality is hard to find, good quality gelatin is a very good source of protein, very good for the connective tissues, very good with amino acids in the brain. It's easily assimilated, and I've talked about mixing your bone broths and your vegetable broths together. We know that collagen increases satiety and it supports first and second brain. Also very useful in the eating disorders. And you can buy powdered collagen and add it to a smoothie daily. Let's talk about cravings in the brain and how we begin to understand cravings. The key to understanding what we crave is understanding our craving profile. What do we crave and what time of day do we crave it? Because our body is communicating to us about what we need. The problem with cravings is that we're not always then answering that call with the best quality food. And so I want to share with you some approaches to managing cravings and really listening to what it is we crave and how that's inner knowledge coming from the body. And then what do we grab when we crave something that will enhance our health? We may need the nutrients, and that's why we crave. If we crave sugar, we may need glucose at that moment. But as we've talked about, refined sugar may not be what we should be grabbing. We may crave foods because we're actually allergic to them. For example, people with bulimia often crave wheat. They don't binge on carrots, they binge on wheat. And wheat, many people are allergic to gluten or sensitive to gluten, or people may crave high-fat cheeses. The brain may want more fat, or the brain may be craving casein, and it may be allergic to it. And we know that because both casein and gluten trigger the opiate reactions, we may be craving these foods to help us relax. We may crave foods because they remind us of a time in our life when we were happy or when we were sad even. We may smell a food and it may remind us of a memory. We may crave foods because we want to alter our consciousness, reduce anxiety. Or we may crave coffee or chocolate to increase our dopamine. So interpreting what we crave and why we crave it and responding to it with healthy alternatives is our key. The principle of substitutions. Following this principle will give you some tools to deal with cravings and also to improve the quality of the food that you're eating as you're eliminating the SAD diet. For example, you want to find an alternative food to the food that you crave, that you want to eliminate, and substitute a good food, a healthy food, a nourishing food for the food that you want to eliminate. Understand the emotional and the biochemistry of the foods. Find the substitutions that address these needs but are healthier without the side effects. Find the alternative food that will provide the same effect as the foods that you crave. And always mix a fat and a protein with a carbohydrate, and that will help a lot with cravings. So here is a chart of substituting unhealthy comfort foods with healthy options. And these are just a few examples that you can look to. If you want to eliminate breads or sweets, how about sweet potatoes? Sugary treats, smoothie, sweetened with stevia. Chocolate with sugar, unsweetened cocoa powder with stevia or homemade chocolate candy. Cane sugar for honey or real maple syrup. Honey for stevia. If you're drinking too much coffee, how about black tea, decaffeinated coffee, or an herbal coffee substitute like roasted dandelion root, ramon nut, which is also known as the bread nut, green tea chai, or turmeric rooibos brain chai, which I give you a recipe for. This next chart is a chart that we will look at throughout our work together. And I'd like you to look at this chart, which is an amino acid neurotransmitter botanical food entheogen chart that I've created. Along the left-hand column, you're going to see the list of the major neurotransmitters, GABA, serotonin, dopamine, and onward. Then I call your attention to the row that says foods. In this row, you're going to see all of the foods that support that neurotransmitter function and thereby affect cravings, but also affect mood, focus, and cognitive function. So for example, GABA, if you go over to the list of foods, you'll see walnuts, Oats, spinach, beans, liver, and mackerel all are foods that support the GABA or relaxing neurotransmitter. Serotonin. The foods that support serotonin in the brain are salmon, beef, lamb, figs, bananas, root vegetables, and brown rice. Dopamine, coffee, tea, eggs, pork, dark chocolate, ricotta cheese. And on down the list we go. And so you can have this handy and you can share it with your clients. And we're going to build this list together because as we move along, we'll be looking at the amino acids and nutrients that support GABA, the botanicals that support GABA, and indeed we'll discuss, when we explore our module on entheogens, we will discuss why people crave or use certain consciousness-altering substances for either recreation or how they're used for recovery from illness as well. So understanding this biochemistry and the support for neurotransmitter function is going to supplement and augment what we're doing not only around food but around the use of healthy fats for the brain. Let's talk a little bit about some novel approaches to coffee substitutes. Bread nut, also called capomo, or the Ramon nut. This is endemic to both the west and east coast of Mexico. It's very rich in amino acids. It's used in traditional medicine to support the flow of mother's milk. It's a galactagogue, and it's not only human mothers, but pig mothers as well is used traditionally. It's so rich in B vitamins, B6, calcium, so rich in the amino acids and folates. I believe, for example, one of the reasons people traditionally along this beautiful west coast of Mexico are so happy and friendly along with the East Coast is in large part because of the daily consumption of this amino acid rich fruit. Now, short of taking a trip to the West Coast or East Coast of Mexico, you can buy some products for sale that include the Ramon nut. These are in coffee substitutes, one of which is Ticino. So look for anywhere you can find, and sometimes you can buy imported Capomo or Ramon nut. It's a delicious coffee substitute. You can add your almond milk or your cream to it, and it'll not only give you a wonderful boost in the afternoon, but it won't make you jittery. It'll make you happy. I've mentioned a number of times green tea and its value as a coffee substitute in the afternoon. It'll still give you that little bit of a boost, but it won't make you anxious. Now what I'd like you to do is think about doing an exercise where you make your own food substitutions list. On the left-hand side, place a list of the comfort foods that you enjoy, but that maybe aren't working for you in all ways, or maybe you've been wanting to stop using them as much, or maybe you want to find alternatives. And then in the right-hand column, based on some of what we've discussed, think about some alternatives and how you might explore some alternatives for these comfort foods that you enjoy. I made a list of a few here. Wheat and craving toast with butter and jam. How about a baked potato with all the fixings? A chocolate bar with sugar. How about fresh hot cocoa with stevia topped with real whipped cream? Or fast food French fries? How about getting some potatoes and baking some fries in olive oil and making a cilantro mayonnaise dip? How about you get started on your exercise list now? Let's now turn to different kinds of diets and exploring how we know what's the right diet for us and for our clients. I've given you a list of just a handful of diets that people follow. The ancestral diet, we'll explore that in depth in a few minutes. The Atkins diet, which we might think of as a carnivore diet. The Paleolithic diet, the paleo diet that suggests we eat according to how our Paleolithic ancestors ate prior to agriculture. A modified carnivore diet, a ketogenic diet, used successfully for the treatment of epilepsy, but now also applied for the treatment of some cancers. An anti-inflammatory diet, the gut and psychology syndrome diet, the GAPS diet, used particularly for the neurodevelopmental disorders. The Mediterranean diet, I think, is widely known, eating according to how people in the Mediterranean eat and live. Lots of olive oil, lots of olives, lots of fresh fruits and fish and vegetables, lean proteins. The raw diet, the vegetarian diet, the Ayurvedic and Chinese 5-element diet, if you're working with Ayurvedic practitioners who explore and identify your constitutional needs. The macrobiotic diet, veganism, and then fasting and detoxification diets. There's a whole lot of different type diets out there. How do we know what's right for us? And furthermore, how do we know if our clients are eating what's right for their type? Let's begin with an ancestral diet. Ancestral diets are linked to our cultural heritage and our genetic heritage. And the benefits of an ancestral diet is linked to what we talked about during the first module. There's no one right diet for everyone. It depends on where we're from genetically. So the concept is foods and medicines consumed by our ancestors for millennia evolved over time with a specific human culture in time and place. The environment determined the genetics, and the genetics altered the environment. Ancestral diets optimize nourishment. They take into account the foods, diets, and preparation methods derived from our authentic cultural traditions. They vary by geography and by ethnic groups. They make use of local, fresh, nutrient-dense, and optimally prepared traditional foods that are based on our needs. They bring balance to the body, mind, and spirit. So culture, genetics, and diet intersect with our ancestry. We should eat the types of foods similar to the foods our ancestors ate. For everyone, this means foods free of refined sugar and grains, no synthetic preservatives or food coloring, minimally processed. No matter where we are from around the globe, these foods are created out of modernization and have spread through globalization. Foods should be prepared in their natural state. And in general, all of our research throughout the world shows very similar qualities to authentic diets. Traditional or authentic foods are low glycemic. They're low in sugar, they're anti-inflammatory, and they're rich in omega-3 fatty acids. Food is more than nourishment. It's medicine, it's nutrition, it's ceremonial, it's sacred. There's no better way to understand a culture than by exploring its food. So the principles of ancestral nutrition include whole foods, raw and cooked foods, and ideally some wild foods. Minimal processing, while you will do some cooking, and then of course slow cooking in water, boiling, salting, broiling, pickling, roasting, baking, and onward. All of these methods and all of our ancestors knew how to optimize the nutrients and the medicinal value in food. Let's learn from them. Not only are ancestral authentic foods low glycemic, they're low to moderate complex carbohydrates. Generally, these dietary systems have moderate protein, some higher, but some lower, moderate to high fat diets. Everywhere in the world you'll find the antioxidant-rich berries and fruits. All of our authentic diets have fiber and prebiotics, whether it's bark flour, psyllium, chia, cactus, bran, or oatmeal. And every peoples in the world have fermented foods as well. This gives us some guidance to the ratios and combinations that we want daily. I want to share with you some photos now of some traditional foods of the Pacific Northwest. Here you see some beautiful cattails and clams and fish eggs, the lovely little ooligan or smelt. And those of you in Oregon know that the name Oregon came from the traditional Salish term for the smelt called ooligan. And ooligan was an economically organizing principle of the whole Pacific Northwest diet, so rich in omega-3s. I guarantee you we didn't see a whole lot of ADHD in traditional Northwest Pacific diets. And these foods, you see some hazelnuts in the background, comprised so much of the nourishment of traditional authentic foods of people from Northern California up into Northern Alaska in particular. Here's some white-tailed deer and some smoked ooligan, very rich in DHA for the brain and the eyes, and EPA as well. These photos are from one of our food feasts in our food revitalization programs, working with tribal communities in the Pacific Northwest. I've given you some resources on this in the resource section if this is of interest to you. Now, my people are from Eastern Europe, and so what do we eat? Beets and yogurt. What better combination food is there than beets and probiotics of the Caucasus Mountains? The Inuit people, here on the left, a gentleman communing with a whale, and on the right, the reindeer, high fat, low carb. The Irish, what are traditional Irish foods besides Guinness? We've got a whole range of edible sea vegetables and salmon. The traditional foods of Mexico, among them corn and amaranth. Amaranth, you see here a photo of alegria, meaning joy or happiness. Amaranth is from the Chenopodium family. It's a nourishing grain. It was also the main source of protein and vitamins and minerals pre-contact. A ritual grain of the gods, gluten-free, high in fiber, high in protein, rich in magnesium and iron. Amaranth is a wonderful grain to try. And here, more traditional foods of Mexico. You're probably familiar with another member of the amaranth family called quinoa. There's a cousin to quinoa in the Chenopodium family called huazontle. Look at this beautiful bright red, and then what we do is steam it, almost like broccoli florets, and then it can be made in a variety of dishes. And here's another traditional food called criadillas, and these are lamb testicles. So again, an homage to using all of the gift that the animal provides. So how does ancestral diet and some of these concepts translate into our modern lives? How do we understand the foods that we need? What is our ancestral and genetic heritage? And keep in mind, as we explore the different diets, in many ways, dietary theories and nutritional theories are very much like our theories of psychology. There are many of them. The key is what is the good fit, not only for us, the clinician, but for how we're going to help our particular client. And so think about the range of these ideas in the context of your work currently and how you pick and choose what's right for your client at the point in time in their life. This brings me to the concept of biochemical individuality. And this is a theme that we see throughout our work together in this course. This is a term that was developed by Roger Williams. He was a biochemist at the University of Texas who identified folic acid, B6, pantothenic acid, which is B5, and lipoic acid. He defined the concept scientifically, what I think we've known culturally for millennia, that there's no one right diet or set of nutrients for everyone. The basis for biochemical individuality is that you eat according to your metabolic individuality. This is determined by your cultural genetic heritage. It's determined by the environment in which you grew up. The high-fat diet evolved in the need of the extremely cold climate of the north, whereas we see more vegetarian diets have evolved in the hotter climates of the tropics. Biochemical individuality governs foods that will truly nourish us, just like the fuel that we put into a car to make it hum, so does the fuel that we fine-tune for ourselves make us hum. Scientifically, it refers to the rate of glucose oxidation or the Krebs cycle. And this leads to the fact that some of us are going to be carnivores, some of us vegetarian, and many of us somewhere in between. This also intersects the new science of nutrigenomics. This refers to how food influences our gene expression. Yes, we come into this world with a set of genes, but we now know that what we eat can trigger a gene or suppress a gene. We know that environmental exposures can trigger a gene response or suppress a gene response. And this is also the new science that we'll explore about how to eat for our genetic heritage. Foods either contribute to illness or longevity genetically. And it incorporates deficiencies and toxins. And this speaks to why some of us have to be very careful in our lives and some of us not so much. And we've all known people that have debauched until 105. And those who by the age of 25 have to be very focused on everything that they eat and how they behave. So our risk factors vary for each of us, depending upon our genes, our environmental exposures, and our diet. There's no one right diet for everyone. And for diet, for mental health to be effective, it has to be tailored to the individual. Bioindividuality refers to how we digest and metabolize our fuel. Let's dig in a little bit to the concept of glucose metabolism. I don't want to go too deeply into it, but I want to give you a feel for it, and if this is of interest to you, you can explore it in greater depth. This refers ultimately to the acid-alkaline variations in our blood pH, and this is important because minor changes in our blood pH make us vulnerable to both mental health and physical health changes and potentially dis-ease and diseases. Normally our blood pH is at about 7.46, but minute variations either into higher, becoming more alkaline, or lower, becoming more acidic, can contribute to disease. The concept of metabolic function, according to the rate of glucose metabolism, is that there are people who oxidize glucose, who metabolize it very fast. That's where you burn it very fast. These are the Inuit, for example. They require more protein and fat to slow it down. Now there are people just the opposite. These are the slow oxidizers. They don't burn up glucose quite as quickly. They require a higher percentage of glucose and less protein and fats. These are people of the tropics and India. And then there are the mixed types, those of us that are right in the middle. And so the fast oxidizers are your carnivores, high fat, moderate high protein, and then at the other end are your carbohydrate types. So just in general, think in these terms. Oxidation is the rate at which we burn carbohydrates or glucose. And this is what determines our fuel mixture, just like when you're getting the octane for your car at the gas station. This slide provides you with a theory of metabolic types. This slide continues the theory of metabolic types. So people who are fast oxidizers, their blood pH tends to be a little bit more acid, and therefore they do better as carnivores. The slow oxidizers tend to be a little bit more alkaline, and then the mixed tend to be pretty well balanced and tend to have generally better physical and mental health and well-being. Because as you can imagine, if you're on one end of the spectrum, you can get off a little bit more easily. You've heard me talk a little bit about people who are not biological vegetarians, but adhere to a vegetarian diet. So vegetarianism is already an alkalinizing diet. And so if you are already a little more alkaline and then you're having an alkaline diet, then you can get too alkaline, and this can contribute to higher rates of anxiety. And a little later I'll talk about how that affects blood gases relative to hyperventilation as well in a bidirectional mode. So what are the kinds of foods that support the fast oxidizer, the slow, and the mixed oxidizers? And here I've given you the high protein, moderate to high protein, high fat, generally more high fat diet. It slows down the rate of oxidation, it stabilizes blood sugar, and these individuals do well on the purine foods. I mentioned anchovies earlier, organ meats, sardines and anchovies, liver, heart, for example. These individuals will do well on about 30% protein, 20% carbs, and 50% fat in their diet. They don't always do well on grains. And you can see why. For example, let's continue with Inuit people as an example of the carnivore diet, why bringing in refined foods has been so detrimental to their physical and mental well-being. The mixed oxidizer, the balanced oxidizer, does pretty well with 30% protein, 40% carbs, 30% fats. If this varies a little bit, it won't really affect people too much. You'll hear sometimes people will say, oh, I have a craving for this. I feel like I need to eat more meat, or I need to eat more fresh leafy greens, or I'm craving citrus. Again, this is the body saying, I'm in touch with what I need. I need to balance out my acid-alkaline balance. Likewise, someone can get too acidic. These are people that don't have enough vegetables and fruits in their lives. They're eating lots of refined foods, which are acidifying, and lots of meats, or lots of proteins that are taking them into the too acidic realm. That can contribute to depression. We certainly know it can contribute to heart disease, and the sedentism that often goes along with that can be problematic if they're not truly aligned for that metabolic type. And then, of course, the slow oxidizers. These are your natural vegetarians or lean protein eaters. This is where we emphasize plant proteins. There may be low animal proteins. They may be a lacto-ovo vegetarian or maybe a pure vegetarian living with legumes and other grains. That's a lower fat diet to speed up their rate of oxidation and to stabilize their blood sugar. 25% protein, 60% carbs, and 15. You can do 15, 20%, sometimes 25% fat. Keep in mind that getting sick, having the flu, getting a cold, being under stress may shift your needs as you explore your metabolic needs as well. Let's talk about how we assess. Isn't that the big question we're all asking right now? How do I know what's the right fuel mixture for me? I begin with, how does what you eat make you feel? I want to raise awareness and self-consciousness about how the foods I'm eating are making me feel. That's the first place to begin. Do I feel tired after carbohydrates, or do I feel energized? Do I feel like I need more animal protein? Do I need more or less fat? How do I feel? Then I want to ask, what's my ancestry? Where do my people come from originally? And what are our genetics? Many of us, probably all of us, are quite a mix of contributing genetic factors and contributing genetics and ancestral heritage. And so we can explore that a little bit and certainly understand how we can gather authentic foods for ourselves, but it may not also get us close to the ratio of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. One of the ways we can understand about our own metabolism is by doing a glucose tolerance test. And in the resource section, I've given you some resources for at-home kits. You can also do a longer 4-hour glucose tolerance test that was developed by Harold Crystal, Cristal, who had a complex laboratory procedure for identifying quite the details involved with glucose metabolism. I also, in my clinical practice, use a hair analysis, and I've given you a resource for options for where to do that, because the rate at which minerals are excreted and the ratio of mineral excretion in the hair will give us insight into the metabolism of the neuroendocrine system. And it'll also give us some insight into heavy metal load as well. And so that can help define fast or slow metabolism. Clinical interview, certainly. Questionnaires, there are a number of questionnaires online that you can do to begin to answer, am I a protein type, am I a carb type? There's also a subset of metabolic type called blood type and metabolism that Dr. D'Adamo developed. This is a complex area that looks at blood type diets. For example, relative to mental health, D'Adamo suggests that because people with type O blood have lower enzyme levels of the MAO, and St. John's wort's an MAO inhibitor, that people with type O blood don't do well on St. John's wort. And we see this also with SAMe as well, with undermethylators. So type O, also with mild to moderate depression, D'Adamo suggests would benefit from tyrosine to boost dopamine levels. And so here is biochemical individuality at play. You might have a depressed client, they may be taking St. John's wort, but it may be giving them nightmares or may not be right for them. This is the value of biochemical individual assessment. Cortisol suggests that blood type A respond with stress levels that are higher levels of cortisol than other types of blood type, and that people with blood type A do better with exercise that helps them relax, like yoga. Let's talk about the role of sensitivities and allergies and how they affect mental health. We can have food sensitivities, we can have food allergies, we can also have exposure to environmental toxins, all of which are going to affect the brain, the body, and behavior. I'd like us to walk through some of the more important ones. I will show you some tests to use and some suggestions for how to address these and rule them in or rule them out in terms of the health of your client. Food allergies and food sensitivities are two different things, but they generally lead to an inflammatory process in the body, which affects the body and the mind. You can have a food allergy, you can have a food-induced autoimmune disorder, or you can have food sensitivities, which are generally a little less potent than the allergy itself, but nonetheless can cause significant disruption to well-being. Let's define a food allergy. It's a reactivity in the immune system. It's often genetic and hereditary. It can result from a chronic infection. It can result from eating poor quality or pro-inflammatory foods. It can result from toxic exposure. It can lead to nutritional deficits and chronic stress reactivity. The symptoms of a food allergy can occur immediately upon ingestion. For example, the peanut allergy or a shellfish allergy, or there can be a delayed response. Common allergens can include any food: milk, eggs, wheat, soy, nuts, peanuts, fish, strawberries, and shellfish. There are pollen food allergy syndrome. These are, for example, sensitivities or allergies to foods like bananas, tomatoes, and melons that are associated with a ragweed allergy. And cooking these foods will prevent this response. Now, food sensitivities, or what we also call food intolerance, are the most common dietary inflammatory reaction. These are foods and chemical sensitivities that lead to inflammatory response and symptoms, and it's often very hard to identify the food trigger in this regard because they're often not immediately responsive. It can be days before you feel this reaction. It can also be a low-level reaction that builds up over time. What are some of the symptoms of food intolerance? The skin may show food intolerance in the forms of inflammatory process, the digestive system, the respiratory tract. Diseases like fibromyalgia, GERD, IBS, migraines, ADHD, autism spectrum disorders, depression, insomnia, and chronic fatigue have all been identified as a reaction to, at least in part, to food intolerance. And you remember when we began our course, I talked about the rainbow principle, that in general, we're going to look at food sensitivities and food intolerances and allergies as part of the whole spectrum. It's rare that it's the only cause of mental distress, but instead it's often a piece that you want to address to decrease the inflammatory process in the body. Let's review some common food sensitivities or allergens. Lactose is one of the most important. Lactose intolerance is an immune system reaction to the proteins in milk. You can have a milk allergy from infancy, and you can also develop a lactose intolerance in adulthood. 70% of adults are lactose intolerant, whether they realize it or not. And we need to explore the varieties of cultures and cultural heritages to understand who can digest lactose and milk proteins such as casein. For example, in Africa and among Asians, 80 to 100% of these populations are lactose intolerant. African Americans and Mexican natives are 70 to 80% lactose intolerant. Mediterranean and people of Jewish percent, 60 to 90%, and Northern Europeans, 1 to 5%. Hence, what we understand from these worldwide statistics is generally the people who do best on cow's milk, lactose, and proteins are people of the Scandinavian, European environments. Now, for many people who have a mild intolerance, higher fat to protein and sugar ratio in the milk product itself may make it more easily digested. And what we also find is where there is intolerance and sensitivity, sometimes people can tolerate a little bit of exposure without developing symptoms, as opposed to eating something every day. And that's a principle we'll look at when we look at other types of food sensitivities. The other thing that we know is that the fermentation of lactose and dairy products, which is done worldwide, breaks down much of the lactose, turns it into lactic acid, which then makes it much more easily digestible. And this may be very well why the whole art of fermentation has evolved worldwide, particularly related to dairy. The other constituent of a milk product is its protein called casein. Now later when we discuss nutritional therapies, I'm going to share with you a very concentrated form of casein which has been shown to be anti-anxiety or an anxiolytic. But in the meantime, let's look at the role of casein in cow's milk in particular, where you've got higher protein content in yogurt, cheese, kefir, milk, ice cream. You'll see large amount of casein. Casein has been implicated in research in the development and maintenance of symptoms associated with schizophrenia, depression, autism spectrum disorders. And 50% of people who are sensitive to dairy, to casein, are also sensitive to gluten. And this is a principle that's called cross-reactivity. This is what, for example, has led to many of the specialized diets that we've discussed. For example, the GAPS, G-A-P-S diet, which eliminates gluten and casein as well as lactose from the diet for the treatment of mental illness, particularly the neurodevelopmental disorders. Let's talk about gluten, one of the very important constituents in grains that is implicated through scientific research in the development of depression and pain in particular. Gluten is the protein in a number of different grains. The proteins are broken up into what are called gliadins and glutenin, which contribute to immune system reactions. We've heard a lot about gluten sensitivity over the last years, and I'd like to deconstruct some of the myths and give you some very practical approaches to addressing gluten sensitivity or the potential for gluten allergy in mental illness. We have what's called a type 1 gluten allergy. This is celiac disease. This is an autoimmune reaction that particularly targets and affects the small intestines and can also lead to severe neurological problems. This is a genetically based autoimmune disorder. We have also the more common type 2 non-celiac gluten sensitivity disorder. This is also an immune response that can lead to both digestive and neurological problems, but it may not always manifest with digestive problems. For example, many people who are gluten sensitive may get diarrhea or pain after eating gluten. This is not always the case with people with gluten sensitivity, and therefore this can go undiagnosed. Wheat, barley, rye, bulgur, couscous, farina, kamut, seitan, barley, and farro are all grains that contain gluten. And grains that do not contain gluten, for example, rice, potatoes, coconut, almond, buckwheat, sorghum, sweet potato, bean, cassava, and rice mixtures and tapioca. And fortunately, there are many of those substances available on the market to make gluten-free pancakes or to make gluten-free breads or other resources for food. Gluten and depression are highly correlated through scientific research. Indeed, some of the early research in gluten came out of World War II, where people who were in mental institutions in Great Britain saw an improvement in their mental health during the lack of gluten products and grains during World War II. And this was an early observational study of the effects of gluten in depression, and particularly psychosis. So the gliadin antibodies are proteins in the blood that are the components of gluten. But 1 out of 250 people have celiac disease. But some estimates suggest that 1 in 10 are sensitive to gluten. Now, some of the ways this can manifest is not only in digestive problems, headaches, joint pain, but also depression. So wherever I do an intake and someone complains of migraines, joint pain, depression, and they also eat a lot of grains with gluten, I might suggest that we do an assessment of their sensitivity, or even a blood test to determine whether they may have celiac disease if there are other signs and symptoms. Dr. D'Adamo suggests that people with type O blood are among the most sensitive to gluten. And there's particularly scientific evidence that people with both gluten and casein sensitivity are more vulnerable to mood disorders, anxiety, major depression, and schizophrenia, as well as bipolar. So this is going to be a very important early step as you're working with food and diet. One of the interesting symptoms that comes out of gluten sensitivity is that the gliadin triggers a protein called zonulin, and this increases the permeability between the cells of the wall of the digestive tract, and this leads to widespread inflammation, and this is what contributes to the neurological and immunological responses. The other response that can occur has to do with an endogenous opiate reaction in these gliadins. This is why some people binge on wheat, binge on the glutinous foods, and then feel almost drugged. And that's because it triggers opiate reactions in the brain. Now, one of the simple ways to test for gluten sensitivity is to eliminate it from the diet. One can undertake testing that's both serum-based or saliva-based to test for gliadin antibodies and reactions, and also the specific opiate reactions to gluten. However, if that's not affordable, or as a first step, I often suggest that my clients eliminate it completely from their diets for a period of at least 30 days and preferably 90 days. Because gluten sensitivity can lead to such a significant inflammatory process in the body, it sometimes takes a few months for that inflammation to be reduced, for the cell walls and the intestines to be repaired, and for some of the symptoms to abate. And if someone can be engaged in doing this elimination, I think that's the smart way to go, and it's the most cost-effective way to go. And what I ask my clients to do is read labels, because there's often hidden gluten in different types of products. There's all kinds of proteins, seitan and glutinous proteins that are added to packaged foods. So if the client is still purchasing packaged foods, they've got to read very carefully. Or if they're eating out, there's often gluten and grains added to soups. And so one can't be too careful in doing this elimination diet. And during this time, I really emphasize lots of root vegetables because the cravings for grains often arise out of the cravings for that sugar and glucose response. And so I like to replace these with the root vegetables, the sweet potatoes, yucca, parsnips, carrots, and squashes are all really great substitutes, as well as gluten-free breads, and rice is going to be a good substitute at this time. There's also available an enzyme called dipeptidyl peptidase 4, and this helps to break down gluten protein fragments. Now, this is something that I recommend for clients who are gluten sensitive when they're eating out, for example, and they may quiz the wait person, or maybe they're eating at someone's home and they don't feel comfortable exploring every nuance of what's contained in the food. They can have this enzyme on hand that will help them break down and digest, but it's not to be used as a regular supplement to then be able to eat glutinous foods as much as you want. Some additional sensitive foods for our population can be corn, and this also includes cornstarch, which is added to an awful lot of packaged foods, and of course a terrible poison, corn syrup and dextrose. It's hard to avoid this exposure if you're eating pre-prepared and packaged foods. Let's talk about some of our favorite foods called nightshades. The nightshade foods are part of the Solanaceae family. This is our tomatoes, our potatoes, our eggplant, and chili peppers are among the most important foods. Now, what we know are nightshades can be inflammatory in upwards of 50% of the population. I've had many of a client who has shared with me that she's had joint pain, she feels achy, and she's taking a lot of painkillers, when in fact we discovered that she loves tomatoes, loves eggplant parmesan, loves to have salsas, eats potatoes every day, and it turned out that she was sensitive to the nightshades. Now, the best way to, again, determine sensitivity to nightshades is to do the elimination diet with nightshades. The difference with nightshades and with gluten is that you can eliminate it within 7 to 10 days. You begin to notice the difference. And so eliminate all the nightshade foods. Even goji berries are a nightshade. And once you eliminate them, see how you feel. Do your joints feel better? Are you taking less pain medication? Are you able to move a little bit more flexibly? And then, if you want, test it by adding a tomato or some potatoes back into your diet and see how quickly you stiffen up and get some joint pain. Now, this is an example. I've had many a client who turns out to be sensitive to the nightshade foods, but who can tolerate them as a treat every once in a while. And so think about perhaps a tomato salad once a month or a baked potato once a month, but daily use of nightshades for these types of individuals who are sensitive is going to be contraindicated. One test that I also teach my clients to use is called the Coca Pulse Test. And I've given this to you in a handout, but let me just walk you through it very briefly. It's a very simple test that allows you to give you an inkling of how your body reacts to certain foods. And what you do is about 2 hours after you've eaten anything, you sit down and relax and take your pulse for 60 seconds. Don't take it for 30 seconds and double it. Take it for a full 60 seconds. Then take the food that you're feeling concerned about that may be causing a sensitivity reaction and put it in your mouth, chew it, don't swallow it, but chew it, masticate, and then take your pulse again. If your pulse rises by 6 beats during those 60 seconds, then that's showing a stress reaction of your body to that food. And that's going to give you a hint of what you may be sensitive to. It's called the COCA pulse test, and it was developed by an immunological physician back in the 1950s to test for sensitivity or high stress reactivity to certain foods. If you're going to test a few foods, you want to leave a little time in between, rinse out your mouth, and test a few foods with that space and time in between. One of the foods that I use for people who are sensitive to the nightshades is yucca. And you can find frozen, you can certainly find fresh yucca. It's not so easy to deal with, but you can find it frozen oftentimes in Vietnamese markets. And it's a wonderful substitute for potato, very satisfying. And you can make yucca fries, you can boil yucca, you can mix it with coconut for a sweet dessert. Make sure you invite your specialists in Vietnamese cooking to share with you their recipes. And I give you some in my own cookbook. And additional substitutions for the nightshades. I love to use not only sweet potatoes, but plantain. Plantain makes a wonderful plantain soup, and I've given you that recipe as well. Let's turn our attention to chemical sensitivities. Chemical sensitivities generally arise out of exposure to environmental toxins, and this is an example of the principle of being both exposed to a toxin and not being able to eliminate that toxin. And this is the principle that guides our work in all of these allergies and sensitivities. We want to reduce the exposure, and then we want to support the body to eliminate whether it's been maintained in the body in terms of detoxification, or how we're going to strengthen the capacity of the body, particularly the adrenal system, the immunological system, to fight that exposure as well. So keep in mind these principles of both reducing exposure, but also strengthening the capacity of the body to eliminate the waste. Many people who've experienced chronic stress and PTSD, for example, chronic trauma, will come to us with what's called chemical sensitivity syndrome. And for many years, and even still, people are told this doesn't exist, or they're told it's in your mind. We saw this with exposure of Gulf War vets, for example, to different chemicals. So it's really important that we listen carefully when our clients talk about their reactivity to perfumes, to cleaning products, to being out in public, in hardware stores, for example, or in public spaces like theaters where the rugs are cleaned, or even in our own offices. And that's why I encourage us as clinicians to use non-toxic cleaning products like vinegar, and to reduce the exposure our clients have. Because while many people can stave off the effects of these exposures, people who've been under chronic stress, who have a high allostatic load, may have hit the wall biologically in their ability to tolerate these many toxins. So there are many theories of chemical sensitivity. One suggests it's enzyme depletion. Others suggest it's an immune system disorder and chronic systemic inflammation. It's also referred to as a nervous system sensitization, a reactivity or a hyperreactivity of the nervous system. It's been understood as a HPA axis dysregulation, and also that there are challenges to phase 2 liver detoxification. We'll explore this much more in terms of actions that our clients can take when we go through our detoxification module. I believe that we have to explore all of these potential contributing factors in chemical sensitivity syndrome. We also have what are called neurotoxins, some of which are part of chemical sensitivity syndrome. These are called neurotoxins or excitotoxins because they affect nerve electrical activities in the body. What are these? Dough conditioners in prepackaged breads, seasonings, yeast extracts, carrageenan that is modified, that is not directly from seaweed, maltodextrin, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, whey protein concentrate can be an excitotoxin. Wherever you see natural flavors and spices, those can be neurotoxins. And of course, glutamate and aspartate. Our big toxin that we see in our drinks that are diet sodas is aspartame. This is to be avoided. This has been shown through scientific research to contribute to depression and irritability. It contributes to migraines, oxidative stress, diabetes, seizures, contributing to blindness, obesity, neurological disorders, and has been found in animal models as a carcinogen. And so one of the first steps I take is get all my clients off of the diet sodas and anything that has these artificial aspartame sweeteners. And this is particularly important with our clients who also have diabetes type 2 and have gotten off of sugar, but they're using a lot of these products in their diet, a lot of these artificial sweeteners. So we've come to the end of our culinary medicine module. I'd like to take just a few minutes to review what we've explored in this module. Explore the foods of the rainbow. Limit the amount of grains and legumes and eliminate the glutens. Eliminate refined carbohydrates. These are your refined flours and sugars. Use plenty of protein in your diet and root vegetables to stabilize mood and blood sugar. Include fermented foods in your daily meals. Identify new foods. Get experimental and enjoy these foods that will give you mental health benefits. Emphasize organic, farm-raised, hormone-free, and antibiotic-free foods. For example, eggs, we've discussed, are one of the most important foods. Even if you can't pay for organic foods for every organic food, go for your organic farm-raised eggs. Try new recipes and share with family and friends. Invite them over for potlucks. With our clients, identify the role of allergens and sensitivities in mental health. Prepare fresh foods and avoid packaged foods. Avoid the preservatives and the additives. Conduct elimination diets with gluten, with nightshade foods. Use the Coca Pulse test if you feel that you're having a reaction to food within 24 to 48 hours. Work with your client to identify the diet types that are optimal for them. Remember, there's no one right diet for everyone. So that asks us to be open to the range of diets from vegetarian to carnivore. Identify the ratio of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats that suit specific metabolism. minimize exposure to toxic heavy metals, undertake periodic cleanses to detoxify, and you can use lots of good foods to do that. Explore the intersection of belief systems and dietary choices, differentiating between close adherence to a specific dietary system and orthorexia. And this is where we bring in the module on assessment along with this module on culinary medicine. Enjoy your food, enjoy your gathering, and enjoy a diversity of meals every day. Thank you.